Welcome to A Year in the Bible with Daily Grace. My name is Kristen.
And my name is Katie. And we want to spend a few minutes a day with you walking through the New Testament, one chapter at a time. This year, we will fix our gaze upon Christ so that we may know him, not only with our minds, but with our hearts.
Together, we will learn that who Jesus is changes everything.
Hello. This is Katie, and we are back studying the Gospel of Mark. Today, we are diving into Mark 4. So far in Mark, we've seen quite the range of responses to Jesus. The crowds love him, the Pharisees hate him, and his family thinks he is out of his mind. Isn't it interesting how different people can have such drastically different reactions to Jesus? And that brings us to parables, which makes up most of Mark 4. Parables were often used by Jesus in his teaching, and they are meant to make the hearer think and to provoke a response from them. Parables contain a main point, but are presented in a way in which that main point is obvious to some, but is hidden to others. In the first parable, a man scattered seeds which land on 4 different types of ground. Some seeds fell along a path, but were quickly swallowed up by birds. Some seeds fell on rocky ground and sprang up quickly, but then withered in the dry sun. Others fell on thorns, so even though they started to grow, the thorns choked the plants out. And then there were seeds that grow along the good soil and produced a crop. Explaining this to his disciples, Jesus says that these seeds, which were snatched up by the birds, those are the hearers of the message that he is preaching, but Satan immediately snatches out the word from them. It has no effect on them. Some are like rocky places who receive Jesus' message with joy, but then bail when persecution comes. Those like the thorns hear Jesus' message, but the worries of this age and the deceitfulness of wealth choke these hearers out. The ones who produce a crop, though, those are the ones who hear and accept Jesus' words. This is an important parable, as indicated by Jesus' repeated appeal to listen to it. He is explaining the reason his ministry has such mixed responses. The reason is that his words are falling on different types of ground. And the challenge for his audience and for us today is this: what kind of soil are you? What is your response to the gospel message? Be careful how you hear Jesus' words. Jesus then assures them in verse 21 through 23 that even though the parables are in one sense mysterious and enigmatic, he hasn't come just to hide himself. He has come to reveal the kingdom of God to his people. So even though he's teaching important truths about something enigmatic like parables, the purpose is to reveal truths about God's kingdom. And then he again issues a warning to pay attention to what you hear, encouraging them to listen to his message with a receptive heart. In the next 2 parables, the parable of the growing seed and the parable of the mustard seed, Jesus demonstrates how the kingdom of God will grow. In the parable of the growing seed, Jesus makes the point that no opposition can stand in the way of God's kingdom growing and spreading. After scattering the seed, it might look like nothing is happening, but things are happening which we cannot perceive or control. The gospel message is going to be effective. And the parable of the mustard seed makes this point as well. In this parable, the tiniest seed ends up becoming the largest plant. Jesus takes an everyday example that all of his audience would have been familiar with to demonstrate that sometimes things which have small beginnings end up becoming something quite large. In Jesus' day, many thought the arrival of God's kingdom would be loud and visual. But Jesus is saying, no, God's kingdom is going to start small and grow gradually. It may look insignificant now, but it will grow to be bigger than they could possibly imagine. After these parables, in verse 35, we transition into a new section that continues through chapter 5, in which we focus on Jesus' authority and power over seemingly untamable forces. In this scene, he and his disciples are crossing the Sea of Galilee when a storm suddenly arises. Just how serious is this storm? Well, if professional fishermen are freaking out, you know it's bad. The winds churn and the waves rock the boat. Jesus is sound asleep. He's not threatened in the slightest. In fear, the disciples wake him up. Jesus simply gets up and he rebukes the wind and the sea, and suddenly everything's calm. And if the disciples were scared of the storm, they are now certainly even more afraid of what they just witnessed. Why? Because many Old Testament passages point out that controlling the ocean is something only God can do. For example, Psalm 106:9 reflects on how God rebuked the Red Sea when he led Israel out of Egypt. And Psalm 89:9 says that God rules the raging sea. When its waves surge, you still them. So, in beholding Jesus in Mark 4, we are struck again by the reality that Jesus does what only God can do. That is because Jesus is God. God in the flesh, the second person of the Trinity, come to live and walk, and yes, even sleep, among us. And because of his authority, we can be assured that of what he communicates in these parables. His kingdom is here, and it is growing. Yes, we often can't see, but because of his power, he is growing his kingdom, and we can trust that it is always at work. And what's even more beautiful is that he invites us to become a part of this growing kingdom. We have the privilege of sharing the good news of Jesus, and we see him changing lives within our churches and even within our own families. We witness foretaste of heaven right here on earth, looking towards the day when his kingdom will be fully established upon his return. What a glorious day that will be. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of A Year in the Bible with Daily Grace. Don't forget to check out the show notes for helpful links and resources related to today's episode. And make sure you are following at Daily Grace Podcast on Instagram for more A Year in the Bible content, and at the Daily Grace Co. for all things Bible study resources. We can't wait to study again with you tomorrow. Bye, friends.